Hi, my name is Mr. Wilde, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a ceramic box using clay slabs. First thing, these are some slabs that have already been prepared, and these are very similar to the ones that you will be getting for the project. Another thing you'll be getting is just a little 5x5 pattern piece, just made out of cut out of cardboard. Some of the tools that you are going to want: a needle tool always comes in handy, any kind of bladed tool for cutting the clay, carving tools, that'll be more towards the end, but then also some kind of ruler or straight edge is also very helpful. I have three different examples of some slab boxes that show the project in different stages. This one here shows the box with the walls and the lid all put together. This next one here is a great example of the keys. I'm going to be talking about the keys later, but the key, not like a car key or a house key, but a key is basically some kind of cut in the side of the clay that allows the lid to come off, but because of the different shape, it also keeps the lid on the project. This one here has some really good examples with two different types of key. One of them, it has just a little triangular piece, and then these other ones are fairly similar, but because of that one side being just one little triangle, that lid has to go on a very specific way, and that is what keeps that lid securely on that project. As you were thinking about ideas for the keys for your project, even though these ones, even though I've repeated this design going all the way around, you are more than welcome to change up those designs as you saw on your demo project design sheet. So one of the very first things that we are going to do is we are going to use our pattern piece, and we are going to cut out 6 5x5 squares. And so we're going to be using 3 of our slabs. When you're setting this on, I just like to use 2 of the already made edges of the clay. And again, the more precise you are, the better your project's going to turn out. But then we're just going to cut along that edge. As you cut these, you do want to cut, or you do want to set that pattern piece along the edge, along those far outside edges. If you cut a piece from the middle, you are going to run out of clay. In order to make a box, you do need 6 slabs, 1 for the bottom, 1 for the top, and then your 4 different sides. And again, the more precise you are, the more squared your clay slabs are, the more precise your project is going to be. Now, one of the other things about this is after, a couple of things. One, after you cut out your 2 slabs, you want that clay to get a little bit leather hard. If you try to build and the clay is still flimsy, those walls aren't going to hold up very well. So let your clay sit out for half hour, 45 minutes before you start constructing your project. It's just going to help it stay, keep its shape a lot better. Now, as far as these other extra pieces of clay, we're going to use these for slip. It's okay if you let them dry out a little bit first, or you can just put them in water and start soaking them until they turn to kind of a mushy consistency. But you're definitely going to need slip later, so hold on to those pieces. All right, so I want to talk about this 4th piece of slab first. This number 4 slab, you are going to use this piece to make a handle or a knob or feet for your project. I'm going to bring this lid over here. Okay, so you'll notice this lid here is curved. I was able to make that curve because the clay was still soft and bendable. So if you're planning on doing something where you're going to bend you're going to bend that slab, make sure you keep it in plastic, make sure you keep it nice and moist so that when you try to bend it, it doesn't break. Now, if you're going to do something where it's just going to be a stiff slab handle, like maybe what you're going to do is just cut out the shape of a handle and set it on top of the project, then that's fine. My plan is to actually just leave this as slab and cut out pieces to make just a rigid handle on the top of the clay once I get done with that. But again, for now, I'm just going to move this to the side. I don't need it right now. Okay, so I do have my 6 slabs here. It's going to be important, like I mentioned earlier, to let those slabs get leather hard. It's when those slabs get leather hard, they lose some of that moisture, they become a little more stiff, and they're able to support their own weight. So with my slabs here, like I said, I have 6 of them. I'm going to pull them off the paper towel, and what I'm going to do is I am going to set them up in almost in a cross formation, and I'll show you why after I get that done. I'm only going to use 5 of them at this time. The 6th one, which is going to be the top slab, I don't really need to worry about that right now. But these other ones, okay. So I just have them, like I said, just kind of in a little cross pattern. The reason for that is that it helps me to know which piece of clay is going to become which side. And if I have it set up like this, and if you want to, you're more than welcome to, but I'm just going to impress a little B, which stands for base, meaning that's the, or bottom, but that's going to be the bottom piece. When I set these slabs up on the bottom piece, they are actually going to sit on top of the clay. Now, because of the size of the 4 walls, there's a couple options to make sure all these walls fit. Again, I jumped the gun just a little bit. One of the other things that I like to do is I actually like to mark all 4 walls, and I'll just do that with a little arrow on each one, and the arrow is pointing away from the bottom piece. And again, that just helps me to remember that those pieces are just going to set up with the arrow pointing up. And that, again, that just helps me know where everything goes. All right, so now jumping back to the little dilemma, right? So this piece here, I'm going to start with this one here. If I set this one here, the width of this piece is the width of the base also. And then that means if I go to set this one up, right, I have a little bit of an overhang. Right, just a little bit of a ledge, a little bit sticking off. Same thing happens with this one, right? I go to set this one on, and the same thing happens. I have just a little bit of an overhang. Now the big problem is with this 4th wall, because this wall starts all the way at the side here, there's no room for that one to fit. So what I like to do is I'll actually take this piece here, I'll slide it over just a little bit, and all of a sudden it gives me a place so that when I set that wall up, it just lines up real nicely along the bottom, which is what I want for it to happen. Okay. Now, one of the things that does with this box is it creates 4 little fins, right? 1 little fin on each side. And I'm going to bring this one in just to illustrate that point, right? So I just have these 4 little fins. you have a couple of options. One, you are more than welcome to leave those fins on. They can become part of your box. Okay, you won't lose points if you leave those on. Again, perfectly acceptable. Another easy thing to do at this point is use one of your edge tools, use one of your blade tools, and what you can do is you can actually slice that fin off once you're done, and then that gives you a more cube-like box. All right, so now we're back to here. We got our slabs. The way that I am going to build this is with the extra fins. For me, it's easier to build it this way and then just cut off the fins later if that's what I want to do. All right, now anytime that we connect two pieces of clay together, we have to use the score, slip, and smooth method. Scoring is where we scratch the surface of the clay. We are not gentle when we scratch. It's not like a little kitten scratch that leaves a little white line on your skin. We actually want to gouge the clay when we score. But one of the things that we need to do, and one of the things that I like to do, is prior to putting these pieces together, I like to score every single part of the project where we're going to connect two pieces of clay. Those places are going to be the perimeter of the base all the way around, which means we also have to score the bottom of each side piece, right? Because those pieces are going to be touching the base. And then the other place we need to that we need to know where to score the clay is what parts of the walls, right? Because the walls are going to come together. And if we do not score those walls together, then as soon as the clay begins to dry out, those walls are going to pull apart from each other and fall apart. Okay, so again, if I'm going with my little plan of having a little thin piece sticking out, then I am also going to need to score along this edge. So I guess it would be to the right of each arrow as it's pointing up. You guys should not let me discuss lefts and rights. But then the other thing is we need to also score this side edge of each slab, because it's that side edge that's going to be touching that facing surface of the side box slabs. When I originally recorded this video, I missed a very important step. Now, when you have your clay and you're getting ready to put the shapes together or put the walls on the base, before you do that, get a piece of cardboard. Set your base piece on a piece of cardboard. You're going to want to be able to move that clay around and possibly even lift it. And if it's stuck on the table, if it's flat on the table, there's a really good chance you're going to destroy your project and ruin it. So again, get that base piece and set it on a piece of cardboard. Your life will be so much easier if you do. Now we're actually going to start building the project, putting the box together. At this point, you are going to need your slip, so hopefully you have your slip that is ready to go. If you may also want some kind of spoon. Sometimes spoons are a little bit helpful, or other types of tools. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Now, for one thing, I have no problem getting slip on my fingers but sometimes it is helpful to have a tool to help distribute that slip. When I add the slip, I am very generous with it. It's almost like I'm making a bunch of little mountain ranges. Because what the purpose of the slip is, the slip is basically like the glue that is going to hold these projects together. And the slip gets forced up into the different score marks that we made, all those little gouges and cracks and stuff like that. And so without enough slip, those projects don't hold together, right? That slip getting squished up into those score marks, that's what creates the grab that holds those pieces together. So I'm just going to continue to add slip. As you can see, I've slipped all these areas. I left this place unslipped just for just a little while longer because I wanted to illustrate something. One of the things that you guys will notice is these areas that I scored along the side face of these slabs. It is a lot wider than the width of the clay that is going to be attaching to it. The reason that's okay is we can always go back and smooth things over and clean it up, but I just want to make sure that those areas are scored well enough that a strong enough grab will take place. And then yes, I can just go on and add slip into that last section, and then I'll start building. Now, one other thing I want you guys to be aware of is you do not have to score every single area, or you don't have to add slip to every single area that we scored. For instance, the bottoms, or the bottom edge of these pieces that are going to be sitting on the base, or this bottom piece, the reason we don't have to add slip to them is because when I set it on top of the base, that bottom part's going to get slip on it. It's going to get a whole lot of slip on it. All right, so all right, let's start building this. I'm just going to start with one wall, and when I set it up, I'm going to judge about the thickness of the clay. Remember, we want to leave just a little bit of an edge there. And oh yeah, there is plenty of slip. And you can't see this one, but you'll see it on the other side. But I'm just going to run my finger along that outside edge, and what it's going to do, I'm just going to pick up that extra slip. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to brace this hand along the outside, kind of at the base, and I'm going to push this wall out so the outside edge of the wall will match the outside edge of the base. So I want to make this as seamless as I can, and that's going to help with that. All right, so then I'm going to take this next piece, and I'm going to, not only am I going to set it down on the base, but I'm going to kind of push it into the side just a little bit. Then I'm going to push from behind. I'm going to push that wall into the second wall here that I'm building. Same kind of thing. I'm just going to run my finger along the edge and pick up that excess slip. And I'm also just going to check, make sure it's lined up along that outside edge, and it's pretty well lined up. I'm going to run my finger along that backside corner. And then I'm going to press a little bit harder. And if you press and slip squishes out, that's a good thing. That means you used enough slip. But we still want to get rid of the excess. If we leave too much slip, in those areas, the moisture from the slip is going to start dissolving the clay and your box is going to fall apart. All right, so I go to the next one here, and again I set it down onto the base piece, and then I press those two wall pieces together. If your clay is still just a little bit wet, obviously you want to be careful. If you press too hard, you're going to dent your clay, put some finger impressions into it. Not that that's the end of the world, but sometimes it looks a little messy. Right. Now I'm going to go along the bottom. Make sure that bottom edge is lined up with the sidewall. All right, now before I put on this last piece, and I'm just gonna grab an extra piece of cardboard here. Oh, I committed one of the sins of ceramics. It's always good to build on something, even if it's just a paper towel. I'm just gonna lift this up very carefully, set it on a piece of cardboard. A lot of the reason that we do that is then I can move the project around. As you can see on the inside, it's kind of messy, and so right now, while this fourth wall is off, it's kind of easy to go in and make things look a little bit nicer. As soon as we get that fourth wall on, right, it's a little bit harder. It's going to be a little bit harder to reach in there without bumping and pushing things around. So I get that, and then I get to my fourth piece here, my fourth wall. I'm going to set it on the base, and then I'm just going to carefully work both sides. And then just where I have some of these different corners, just gonna run my finger up the corners just to clean those up a little bit. Clean them up a lot. And then just like I did with all the other pieces, I'm just gonna run my finger just along the base, just to make sure the bottom edge of the wall lines up with the base. Okay, at this point I can do, I call it a little bit of fine tuning, where I can just go in, right, and I can just check the placement of everything all together. Maybe one part of wall got pushed out a little bit. Now's your chance to push it back in. Re-examine those corners. Sometimes they need a little bit more pressure on them to push them into place. And just like before, if you press, you don't even have to press very hard, but if you press and you get a little bit of slip pushed out, it probably means it could stand being pushed together a little bit more. So I'm just going to go along all four of those sides. Just to make sure everything's grabbing. All right, and then as I look and as I feel, everything's in pretty good shape. Everything's holding together pretty well. All right, so at this point here, this is where I want to add the lid. And very similar to the bottom and the sides, anywhere that the lid touches the top of the box, right, I want to score. So I set it on and it fits pretty well that way. So I'm just going to take the needle tool. I'm just going to score those top edges. Now that we have the underside of the top piece scored and the top edges scored and slipped, we can take this top piece and we are going to very, very carefully lay it on top. Like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently go around. I'm not going to push in the middle. There's no support in the middle, so don't push down in the middle. But what you're going to do is you're going to go around the side edges. And you're just going to push those down. Again, not too much pressure. We don't want to distort the clay. But again, we do want some weight on it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up around the edges. So you want it to make it look nice. And I'm actually going to use my finger because using your finger you can kind of, if there's any kind of cracks or parts that don't quite fit, right, you can just kind of press the clay a little bit with your finger just to get some nice edges. Okay, so at this part, this is where a ruler comes in nice, or some kind of straight edge. If it's a thin piece of wood, that also works. But if you just kind of go along those edges, just do a kind of a, let me show you. Where you just kind of take it and just kind of go along the side. Sometimes that'll clean up some little things and just help square out that box. Now that we're to this part here, I'm going to show you guys how to slice off the fins if that's what you want to do. Right, so I showed you earlier, if you want to keep them on, that's totally fine. But if you want to remove them, it's actually fairly simple to do this. What you'll want to do is take either your needle tool or your blade tool, and all you're going to do is just kind of run that tool right along the edge. And I would do it a few times where you just add a little bit more pressure each time, and that's just going to help everything stay nice and squared. And that little fin part comes right off, right? Then if you something like that, and it gives you a nice little corner. Right. So we'll just switch around, and these go. Make sure you guys see this. Right. Just run it up. Now I can tell that my box is not perfectly squared, and that's going to be okay. We can still make it look really nice and really clean and really finished. And that could be end up being more important than a perfectly squared box. We'll go with close. Okay. So like I said, I just take that ruler, just go up along the sides, and you clean those edges off quite nicely. If there's a bigger piece of clay, a bigger clay crumb, go ahead and just pull it off. And again, we want to hold on to the extra clay. We never know when we're going to need some more slip. Okay. All right, so one of the other things that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make the top the bottom. And to do that, I'm just going to take an extra piece of cardboard. I'm going to set it on top, and then very carefully, I'm just going to flip it upside down. And part of the reason that I want to do that is I want the weight of the box along that seam, just to make sure just to make sure that seam is really, as tight as we can get it, as much pressure as we can get on it. All right. The next part of the assignment is drawing in the keys. And for drawing in the keys, you should have, hopefully you've been thinking about that, or you should have drawn that on your project design sheet. Again, remember the keys are just the line along the lid that helps keep the lid on the project. Now on all four sides you need a key. You can do the same pattern repeated, or you can do 4 different ones. You can do 2 of each. It really doesn't matter, as long as there's just no line that's straight across. Okay, it does need to have something in it other than just a straight line. To do this, I'm going to start out by turning the box on its side. And what I like to do, because one of the things you have to be careful of is we don't want to cut up into the lid of the project. And so what we need to do, or what I like to do, is this is where I'll use my ruler. And if you don't have a ruler, you can just kind of guess a little bit, but I'm going to make a mark just about an 1.5 inches down from the top. If you want to do 1 inch, that's fine, but I'll do it on this side here. And I am making just a little cut, just a little incision into the clay. I'll flip once, I'll flip twice, because that brings me to that other side. And again, just at 1.5 inches, make an incision, 1.5 inches down, make an incision. Okay, now it helps some people if you just take your ruler and draw a very, very faint line that goes across. Now I know I said that for that lid line where those keys are supposed to be, that you cannot have just a plain old straight line. Okay, this is just to help make sure that as I'm drawing my keys in, especially if I'm doing some kind of a repeated pattern, that all of my keys will kind of be equal and kind of balance out. All right, so I got that. I got all those lines in. Right, if I was to bring this up right side up, if I were to cut this off now, right, I would have that lid that would separate from the body. But again, I do want to put the keys in. I'm going to do 4 different ones, okay? And sometimes what you can do, what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to use the ruler. I'm just going to kind of play around a little bit, but I'm going to have bring a notch up above the line, but then I'm also going to have a little notch that goes below the line. At this point here, if you wanted to kind of erase out that first little cross line that you made, we can do that. Flip it over. For this one here, I'm just going to freehand, and I'm just going to do kind of a wavy line. It's going to go up, and it's going to go down, and it's going to come up, back up to the line. I'm going to erase it out. This one here, I'm going to do what I call monster teeth, where the lines just kind of go up and down. They're not going to be very even. Now, this is the thing I will say about monster teeth. If you have your heart set on doing a monster teeth type pattern, the fewer the teeth, the better it is. If you do a whole bunch of teeth where you just have this crazy zigzag line going up and down several times, it is going to be, one, it's going to be incredibly difficult to bring all those points together when we cut the lid off. The other problem we run into is for the glazing. When we go to glaze it, oftentimes glaze gets dripped in the points, and then you end up with teeth that get stuck and they end up breaking off. And so again, the fewer the teeth, the better off we are. And then I have one more to do. And for this one here, I'll do another kind of a wave type pattern where it kind of comes up and down and up and down, and then again just go through and erase out that straight line. All right, so normally I would wait a day before I actually start cutting the lid off of the body of the box. In fact, I might, well, you're definitely going to want to keep it in a bag. You don't want the clay completely drying out, but it does not hurt the clay for it to sit in a bag overnight and get just a little bit more leather hard. All right, but regardless, the next step is that we're going to start going over these lines with whatever cutting tool that we're using. And the thing about this is we need to be really, really careful not to put too much pressure on the clay. If we cut really hard and in a sawing motion, it's going to force that clay to kind of go down and up. That can pop some of the seams, but then it can also change the shape of the box to where maybe later on, you know, the lid is kind of in and the box kind of sticks out a little bit, or vice versa, where it just doesn't line up very well. All right, so one of the things that I do like to do, because the corners are a little bit thicker, right, because we have those two pieces of clay coming together, sometimes I will take my blade and I'll cut just kind of, I'll go in kind of deep, but then what I'll do is I won't cut as much, and I'll just start cutting the different edges of those lines. If it's something like a straight line, I might use a straight edge to help make sure I get that line exactly where I want it to be. And again, when I get to the corners, I'm going to cut in just a little bit more. Flip it. Now we have that curvy edge, or that wave, kind of the wave design. And I'm going to go a little bit slow to start out with. So one other thing, when the clay is a little bit more leather hard, as you start cutting the keys of your lid, because the clay is harder, it'll guide your blade a little bit better. Right now the clay is still fairly soft, and so I'm going to have to be a little bit extra careful so that I don't miss where I'm cutting. All right. So again, I'm coming up on my monster teeth. So again, I'm just going to use a ruler. Going to cut into the clay. Be careful not to cut past your marks. Again, we want to avoid cutting into the lid piece. And one other thing about the project I haven't talked about is we're also going to be adding some carving design to the side. So you also need to be thinking about what kind of incising or impressing you're going to be doing on the sides. All right, I have another wave design, and again I'm just going to kind of freehand it. I'm going to go a little bit slower because I do want to stay inside the line that I made. Sometimes I tell my students they don't have to stay inside the lines, right? This is art. We get to freestyle it a little bit, but I do want nice clean cuts. So yes, I'm staying inside the lines this time. All right, so I'm just going to keep cutting around a little bit more, and I just cut down a little bit more each time I go around until I break all the way through. So you saw me go around 2 times with my blade tool to cut through the clay to cut the lid off. You might have to go around 5 or 6 or 10 times. Whatever you do though, don't press too hard. We don't want to break the clay or warp it or anything like that. So again, please be careful as you're going around, and it might take you more times. Now when you get to this point here that you've gone around, you've felt yourself break through where the blade has gone all the way in, as you begin to pull it off, it might stick in a couple places. And so what you might have to do is, if you go to pull it off and it's not quite coming off, you might have to go in and kind of maybe work on one of the corners a little bit just to make sure you get through that clay all the way. And usually it's those little corner pieces kind of where those edges are that kind of stick. But what you should be able to do is go and lift the lid off, right? And then what you do is you have the lid and the body of the box right next to each other. Now one of the things, well, hopefully you can see inside the box, okay? So if you remember, we turned the box upside down so that the weight of the box could help put pressure on the lid to help attach those pieces better. Because we sealed that box off, we weren't able to clean up the inside corners of the clay, or inside corners of that lid, and now we are able to, right? Even though now it's the bottom, we still want to clean it up. So if you just carefully put your finger in there and run your finger along those inside corners, you should be able to clean it up and give it a real nice look. That is one of the things that I grade on, is how well it looks on the inside. It's important that the craftsmanship is good, that it looks good. And so yes, that is one of the things that I will be looking at when I'm grading this project. Now, as you're looking both at the body of the box and the lid of the box, there's some clay crumbs in there, there's some jagged edges in there. Now is a great time to clean those up. Again, that is one of the other things that I will be grading on. Sometimes you can use your tools to go in there and clean up those edges. Sometimes your finger works just as well. But basically, we want to go over these surfaces and clean it up, right? So these 2 edges where the lid and the body come together, we want to clean those up. Eliminate all the clay crumbs, all those sharp little jaggedy areas, and then also we want to just on the inside, just because of the way that we cut the clay. When we cut the clay, we forced a little bit of the clay on the inside, or we forced it to move on the inside, and it creates a jagged edge. And right now, while the clay is still raw, it feels fine, right? It doesn't feel sharp, it doesn't feel jaggedy, but the minute we fire this, that becomes a sharp edge, and it's going to feel very much like a kind of the rough wall of a cinder block wall, right? And so anytime we reach into that box and we touch the side of that box after it's been fired, we're going to feel that rough surface against our body or against our hands, which we don't like, right? We'd prefer smooth. So again, we're going to take a little bit of time and we are going to clean up those surfaces. All right, so just a minute ago, I showed you guys, right, the inside of the box, and there was still slip inside. But what happens is some of you guys are going to build your box, and it might be a day or two before you get back to it, and that slip on the inside has started to get leather hard, and you can't just go in with a finger and clean it up. You might have to use a tool to clean it up. But there's a couple of things you can do. One, if you still have some slip, you can take that slip and go along that inside seam and kind of build that slip up on that inside corner. And if you let it sit for a little while, it'll kind of moisten the slip that's a little bit hard. And then you might be able to go in with your finger and clean it up kind of nicely. If it's still just a little bit hard, you might end up taking a couple of different tools. One, you could take the ruler, right, and just kind of use that ruler and just gently scrape, and you should be able to pull off some of that excess slip. Something like the back of the spoon, if you have kind of a flatter edged spoon, you could also do that, where you just kind of press that clay down a little bit or pull off some of that excess. Mostly we just want to make it look nice. So smooth it over, dig a little bit out if you have to, but again, we want a nice smooth look and just a nice 90-degree angle. All right, so I've pulled off, I used the edge of the tool to pull off a lot of the clay crumbs and to get rid of that jagged edge, but I'm looking at it and it's still a little rough looking. So this is where I'm going to use a sponge and some water. And one of the things about this, and you'll hear me say it a million times, water can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy. If you use too much water, it is going to dissolve your clay and your project is going to completely fall apart. But if you use just a little bit of clay, it creates a very nice finished surface. It'll pull off a lot of the clay crumbs, a lot of those little jagged areas that you couldn't fix with the tool. It is going to help get rid of those. And so if you just go over surfaces, just a little bit quick, a little bit fast. So I mentioned the monster teeth, right? Because they come to a point, it is kind of hard to get down in there. But sometimes if you can kind of squeeze the clay a little bit, or squeeze the sponge a little bit, you can get down in there and fix that up. And the best time to use a sponge is when the clay is leather hard. If the clay is still plasticky and kind of bendy and movable, wait. It does not hurt to wait, and it'll probably be better for your project if you do. If that clay gets leather hard and it's a little bit more stiff, then a little bit of water is not going to do much anything to it. All right, so again, I get to the other side of the monster teeth. I'm going to squish that sponge down. Get down into those teeth. It's almost like being a monster dentist, right? Got to go down and get all those food crumbs out. Gross. I'm just going to continue to hit those surfaces. if there's stuff on the outside, clean that up as well. If the sponge starts getting a little bit too dry, dip it in the water, squeeze out most of the water, all that excess. If your sponge is dripping, it is way too wet. All right, so now we have that done. And one of the things about the lid and the body is, as much as we can, we want those together. As the clay begins to dry, clay shrinks just a little bit, and if we let these dry separately, then there's a really good chance that as they dry, they'll kind of distort against each other or opposed to each other, where when you try to add the lid later, it won't go back on. For this one, we set it on top and it still fits pretty nicely. All right, so the next step then is going to be the handle and the feet. And I am actually going to start with the feet. And so I'm going to flip the clay upside down again. All right, so that we have that. And then we're going to have this here, this slab here. And I like this slab. It's been laying out for a while. Maybe not quite as stiff as I want it to be, but definitely getting there. I am going to cut out some sections of the feet, or for the feet, and then I'm going to add them to the clay. When I do this, when I'm designing my project, I want feet that will go with the design of the box, right? If I have a lot of very geometric and sharp angles that I've designed into the clay, or let's say the handle, I've designed the handle to be very angular and geometric, then I probably want my feet to be geometric too. If things are going to be a little bit more natural looking, rounded, right, then that's probably what I want to do with my feet as well. All right, now most likely you're not going to be able to do this in one sitting, meaning you're going to have to store your clay. We do not want it drying out, right? We don't want it drying out until we're completely finished with it. And so yes, this is where your bag comes into play. As you are getting ready to do this, it's, again, keep your clay on your cardboard. If you can move your clay by the cardboard, it helps with the structural integrity of it, meaning it helps keep it from falling apart and breaking, right? But gently put it in your box or in your bag. Put the box in the bag. There we go, right? And then if you just take these end pieces and just kind of fold them over, you can lift up the box a little bit and just slide it under like that, and let the weight of the box keep that closed. Now, if you're going to be gone for a few days, you might want to actually like twist it up, use a baggy tie to keep it from drying out. But as long as the clay is inside the bag, it should be fine for a couple of days until you get back to using it again. So the box has had just about a full 24 hours to sit and work its way toward leather hard. So we're gonna take it out of the bag now. We're going to be careful because we don't want the bag, or we don't want the box breaking or anything like that. All right. And let's see. I'm going to leave it upside down because I actually want to work on the feet first and add the little legs to it. There's a couple different ways you can do that. You can just form the clay, just kind of sculpt it, pinch it into shape. but I am actually going to use one of the slabs, half of that extra slab that I had yesterday. I want 4 legs that are the same. And so one of the ways that we can do that is by making a pattern. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a little straight edge here. And I'm going to make those legs about 2 inches tall. And one of the cool things about making the pattern is once you make that pattern, that will work for all the pieces. You can just use that same pattern. And just going to go in an inch, and then at the top I'm going to go to 2 inches. Alright, and it's just kind of a prism shape. And I'm just going to use the scissors and I'm going to cut. And cut, just like that. Now you can do one of 2 things. You can just use that and just kind of draw around how you want to cut that. The other thing that you could actually do is line up the square on top of the clay and just cut through that way. Now the clay has gotten leather hard, so it's at a pretty good. Like if I tried hard, I could bend it, but the nice thing about this is I can hold it, and even if I bounce it a little bit, the clay keeps its form pretty well. And what I'm going to do with these legs is I'm just going to attach 4 of them that way, but of course I got to cut out the other ones first. And so I'm just going to continue to cut. You'll notice that I don't do it all in one cut, that it's okay if you go back and if it takes a couple of times to do that. But again, I just lay this on, make sure these edges of the cardboard line up with the edges of the clay. And if it takes you about 4 cuts to get through, that's fine, no problem there. And then my last piece. And I'm just going to cut through this way. All right, that gives me my 4 legs now that are nice and even. The nice thing about this is when I attach these, right, I'll just have them kind of go in at a diagonal, kind of pointing towards the center, and it'll end up real nicely. Now to make sure that that I have them pointing each other, I can just kind of eyeball it, but it is kind of easy to make a mistake. So if you just take your ruler or your straight edge and just line it up corner to corner and just draw a really light line, then I'll draw it the other way as well. I can see exactly that line where that foot is going to sit. Okay. Now there's 2 different ways to attach these. There's kind of the quick and easy way, but then there's a better way to do it that I'm going to demonstrate, and to me it's just a better way of keeping that foot attached. All right, now the easy and simple way to attach the foot would be to simply score that surface, add some slip, and then just set it on. But what happens with that kind of connection is all it's going to take is a really, really light bump, and that could knock that foot off to where it's not going to stay very well. What I like to do is I actually like to cut a little groove in the clay here that the leg actually sits down into. Now we need to remember, you know, that the clay is not very thick, and so we can't cut down very thick, but if we even go down, you know, just a little bit, so that part of this part of the leg is actually embedded into that bottom slab, it tends to hold a lot better. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trace around there, and I'm going to start out scoring it just because that kind of just loosens up that clay a little bit easier, and then I'm going to trace over that line again. I'm going to trace it on both sides. And if anything, you want that groove just a little bit deeper. The surface, and then I can just go through, use my blade tool, and just cut out, just pull out some of that extra clay. Again, you'll just need to be a little bit careful that you don't break through. And then I'll just kind of clean that out just a little bit. Now before I actually score it and slip it and set it in, what I want to do is I want to make sure that it's going to fit. That one does. It makes a nice little fit. It actually stays in place pretty well. All right, so now I'm just going to go in, and now I'll actually, this is like the real scoring, because I'm going to score and then I'll add the slip, and then I'll actually add that leg in. So I score inside the groove. We still want to score that bottom surface of the foot. I'll go back over it, I'll go both ways. And I still have my slip. My slip is in great shape, and I am actually going to fill in that groove with slip, just so that I make sure I know that I have enough slip. Now when I put the piece in, I know about where it goes, and I'm just going to gently move it back and forth just to make sure that it's in that groove. I'm not going to press too hard because, again, I don't want to push through the bottom of the box. You can probably see all that excess slip. It's kind of messy. That's okay. It's what our fingers are for. Cleans it up really nicely. One of the other things I like about using the finger is that you end up pushing some of that clay back into that gap with just a little bit of pressure, and that just makes sure there is, or helps to make sure there is plenty of clay in there. All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and move on and do that to the other three corners. So the next thing that I'm going to do is turn it right side up so I can set it on the legs. I'm going to do so very carefully because I don't 100% trust those legs yet. It's a brand new weld, you know, that we made there, attaching the feet to the base. And then the clay, you know, it's still only a day old, so I don't know how super strong it's going to be. So I'm gonna move the cardboard out of the way, and then I'm just gonna very, very carefully turn it that way. And then I'm gonna turn it right side up and set it on its feet. Now, one of the reasons why it is good to get it on the feet is because we want it to be able to balance out where it balances on all 4 feet nice and evenly. You know, where one's not, I mean, we don't want it rocking back and forth. Okay, so right now all 4 feet are touching the ground. But again, I don't completely trust those legs yet. So if you have some cardboard or folded up paper or wood or anything, I just have some little ceramic bricks here. I'm actually going to put those partially underneath my box. Yes, it is cheating. I am cheating, but again, I don't want those legs supporting the full weight of the clay just yet. So I'm just going to slide those in, just one under each side. They're just barely taller than the legs or than the feet. Yeah, so that'll hold those in place so that the weight of the box doesn't collapse on those legs. All right, so I'm going to take the lid off. Again, because the clay was a little on the moist side yesterday when I closed it in, it's sticking just a little bit. Don't wrench it off. Oh, there we go. Just a little bit of pressure, and yeah, that lid comes off nice and easy. Everything still looks pretty good. Have nice smooth surfaces. Now, as soon as the clay gets a bit more leather hard, even close to bone dry, I'll take the sponge and I'll go over those edges just a little bit more, just to take out any more of those little blemishes. Okay, but for right now, I'm going to set the lid back on. I know it'll come off now, even if I have to coax it just a little bit, but we're going to set that on. All right. Okay, and then the next step is going to be making the lid of our project. And if I can, before I continue with the handle, my handle design, I moved the clay onto a piece of cardboard just because it makes it so much more easier to move around. All right, for the lid or for the handle, similar to the base, I want it right through, I want to find the middle point, and I want to create some guidelines. So again, I'll just use my ruler or my straight edge, make an X corner to corners, so I know where that middle piece is. I'm just going to go ahead and use this piece of clay here. I have an idea of what I want to do for the handle, and so I'm going to cut these 2 pieces off. Alright, and so one of these pieces I'm going to stick like that, and then this piece here, I'm actually going to, I'm going to cut a notch out of this piece of clay at the top, and I'm going to cut a notch of clay out of the bottom of this piece there, and they're going to intersect to where you know, they'll look kind of like an X once they're all together. Your husband, sheesh. So I'm just going to measure. I know this is the thickness of the clay, so I'm just using that to measure how thick the clay is going to go. This might be a little bit of a trial and error as far as how far down I cut. Let's see. I'm going to make a mark at halfway, but I'm not going to quite cut halfway down on either of those. Then I'll just use my blade tool. And again, one of the things you'll notice is I rarely do one thing just in one little cut. One other thing about clay, usually you want to do things in increments. It tends to work a little bit better that way. But I'll just go through and cut down until I go all the way through. And then I have these two pieces like this. I will measure now. All right. And it almost comes to the end. And you know, I'm going to take off just a little bit off of each side. And I think that'll fit quite nicely. Measure those two pieces again. And I am almost there. I am so close. So I'm just going to take a little bit off of one side. And then when I attach those, or when I put them together now, there's a nice flat surface there. All right, now the way that I am going to add the lid is going to be similar to how I added the legs. I'm going to line those up there, and I'm going to outline them just a little bit. And then what I'll do is create just a little groove in the clay where I will dig down, and I'll know that that piece will sit in that spot like that. The other thing that I'm going to do is I want to make sure that these two pieces don't jiggle around, so I am going to score the inside of this piece. I'm going to score the outside of that piece. I'll use a little bit of slip, and I'll attach those together to make sure that they don't come undone. Now that I've got the handle on and the feet on, I want to do just a couple of little things to clean the project up just a little bit. As I'm looking on it, I can see some of my guidelines. There's some clay crumbs, there's some excess slip, and I want to clean that. I want to clean my project up. I want to make it look good. So there's a lot of things you can use, some of the different tools, the sponge, the water. Again, be careful how much water you use. The clay is still wet enough where too much water will dissolve it and break it down. But I'm just gonna start with my little extra piece of cardboard, and I'm just gonna kind of use that corner, that inside corner, to clean up some of that excess slip, kind of by going up and by going down. And I'll just turn, just kind of so you guys can see. I'll start close to the bottom and pull it up, wipe off that excess slip, and then even bring it down, and then just kind of pull it away. And these are some of the things that make the difference between an A and a B on this project. Just those fine, paying attention to those fine little details and cleaning things up, just making your project look a little bit more clean and a little bit sharp. Let's see, I'm gonna, because those angles match, I'm gonna pull through that little gap there at the bottom. Now, one of the things that I need to be really careful of is there's more weight on the top of the handle than the bottom, and it's only attached in a fairly small spot or a small place. So again, I need to be careful not to bump that handle and to take care of it. All right. So the next thing, I have some of these lines, some of my guidelines in there, and I'm just going to take that sponge, and again, I got it just a little bit wet, just a little bit of water. Now, one of the nice things that happens, again, as long as you're not using too much water, but what happens is some of the clay particles combine with the water in the sponge, and it's basically like you're making slip in your sponge. Not a whole lot, but enough that when you go over some of those lines or some of the blemishes, that clay water mixture helps clean things up, makes things look really, really nice. Now again, just like I mentioned after I put the feed on, I'm gonna wait till this thing is a bit more leather hard, and once it's more leather hard, it's usually a little bit more durable, and I can sponge off places that might be a little bit more fragile right now. Say for instance the handle, even though I see a couple imperfections on the handle, and as much as I want to touch them with the sponge, I am actually going to wait until that clay is a little bit more firm. At this point, I can also go along the sides, clean the sides up a bit, the corners even. Again, because the clay had close to 24 hours to sit, it's in a lot better shape, but the pressure that I'm putting on is very, very light pressure. I can feel the moisture in the clay, and if I was to press hard enough, I would push that clay in and change that shape to where those keys probably aren't going to fit as nicely. So again, I am going to be just a little bit careful with that pressure. So another of the major requirements for this project is decorating or designing the outsides or the sides of the box. I'm going to use a ribbon tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut into the clay, and I'm going to cut out sections of the clay. I'm going to make some grooves. That technique is incising, removing clay by carving. One of the last steps that we're going to do with this project is we are going to decorate the sides of the box. You can use a combination of burnishing, impressing, and incising. I'm actually going to do some incising. Just as a reminder, incising is removing clay by carving. Now, if initially you want to start with something like your needle tool to draw in the design of what you're going to carve out, that's fine. But don't just leave it as a line drawing with the needle tool. Actually do some incising where you are removing clay by carving, right? Something like that. One of the things you do need to remember, the clay is not very thick, right? So you don't want to take this thing and gouge as hard as you can, because again, the last thing we want to do is tear through the clay entirely. So again, be careful as you are doing that incising. All right, so all I'm going to do, and I'm just going to start out just following the pattern of the lid. And as you can see, it just, the clay, well, at this stage, it just comes out really nicely as I carve it. The clay is still fairly soft. If you wait until the clay is a little bit more leather hard, it might not come out quite as well initially, or you might just have to go over your design more than once, which is fine. I find that I will go over my designs sometimes 5 or 10 times. It doesn't mean I'm carving deeper each time, but as I go through that groove, I'm pulling out clay crumbs, or I'm just creating a nice smooth edge. Now with this design, I could do something where I just kind of, maybe I repeat this design a couple more times, and even though I like that key design, I'm going to kind of make it look a little bit more like a maze, and I'm going to throw just throw a little bit of variety in there. I'm just going to kind of wing it. Again, I'm going to be careful not to dig down deep into the clay. And sometimes when I get to the edges, especially if I can tell that this is the side of the wall, right? I don't want to pull that wall out. So at the sides, I might actually start on the outside and cut inward. Again, I want to avoid, damaging that seam where that wall is. All right, I'm going to do a couple more incising cuts in here. And they're a little bit similar to the keys. Hopefully there's enough variety in there. Yeah, I'm just going to go with the diagonal one that way. And I'm going to actually kind of end it there at the bottom. All right, now I don't know if you can tell from that angle, but wherever I made a cut or wherever I made an incision pulling out that clay, it kind of forced the clay up into a little bit of a jagged surface. Again, we want to avoid those jagged surfaces and all those clay crumbs. So this is a time that you could either go over with a finger or a tool. I'll actually use this tool, and I'm not digging any clay out right now. I'm just kind of just very, very lightly touching the surface, just pulling off some of those clay crumbs. Now, one of the other reasons, like I repeatedly will go over my patterns that I'm cutting out, is as the clay gets leather hard, you get less clay crumbs, which means you get a cleaner cut. But again, lots of times it means going over that incision several times. But I can also just take the sponge and go over those surfaces. clean them up pretty nicely. All right, so I just want to go over the project requirements just so you know everything you need to do to get a 4 on this project. The first thing is having a nice squared box. Bottom's flat, sides are nice and vertical, top is flat on the top, right? We want a nice, square, even box. The next thing, one of the big things that I am going to be looking for are going to be the seams. And the seams that I am talking about would be the underside of the lid. Okay, so I don't want to see the line where the lid and the sides come together, or the two sides. All those needs to be smoothed out, not just on the underside of the lid, okay, but also on the inside of the box. I want all those lines hidden, and then even on the outside of the box, right? I don't want to see where the line of the wall, you know, where those two pieces of the wall come together. So make sure all those seams are covered up nicely. One of the other big things, and a lot of people skip this one, is where the lid and the body. I'm just going to move this over here for just a minute. Okay, but this is going to apply again to both the lid and the body. This seam here needs to be nice and smooth. We want a nice 90-degree angle when it transitions from that flat surface to the outside body. We also want that happening on the inside. Again, one of the things I mentioned before is when you cut in, as we're cutting the lid off and as we're cutting, we push the clay in just a little bit. Make sure you get rid of that little ridge so that again you have just this nice smooth transition from this top surface to the inside of the wall. Okay, and again, one of the easiest ways to do that, clean that up, is just with the sponge, and you can do that at different times throughout the project. All right, so one of the next things is the feet, right? We need to attach the feet. I'll pull it off just a second. All right, those feet are attached nicely. The seams look nice. We've gotten rid of any kind of excess clay, and we don't see that line as well. And again, when we stand it up, right, if we try to wiggle it just a little bit, it actually balances really well, right? It doesn't wobble back and forth. So make sure you're taking care of that also. Set that back there. Okay. And then also same thing with your handle or your knob on the top. Right. We want good construction. We want it to look nice. We want a nice, clean attachment as well. All right, the next thing that I am going to be looking for or looking at is the decorations on the side. For the incising, right, the carved areas need to look nice and smooth, not rough, and then again, all the clay crumbs eliminated. This side here is actually pretty nice. I've eliminated most of the clay crumbs, but I have one of the other sides here, right? This side still needs some work. As I look, I have some rougher areas. If I rub my finger over it, right, I can knock off some of those clay crumbs. Again, if we just take that sponge, just barely damp, and we run it through those grooves or through those carved areas, that's going to clean a lot of stuff up. It's going to give us some nice clean grooves, and again, it's going to help eliminate those clay crumbs. If you have to do that 3 or 4 times over the course of the project, that's fine. It's worth it to make it look good. All right, if you decide to do burnishing, and hopefully you all remember what burnishing is, right? We take that nice smooth surface, something like the back of the spoon is fantastic, and we just start rubbing the clay. It can go back and forth. up and down. We can do little circles. Again, I'm being very careful not to bump my handle. But what that does is it compacts the clay and it makes it really, really smooth. Now, to get a 4 for burnishing, we also want some shine. You need to wait until the clay is leather hard before you're actually going to get that shine. You can start burnishing now, but there's just too much moisture in the clay while the clay is still a little bit on the plastic side. So once we start losing some of that moisture and it dries out a little bit, the leather hard stage is perfect for burnishing. The last thing that I have in there is impressing, and for impressing, to get a 4, it needs to be deliberately pressed, right? We just don't want to take something and just start poking all over the place. That's something more like a 2, where it's just a randomly pressed area. 3, thoughtfully pressed, right? We're thinking about it. Maybe we just go, dots around the top. But again, to get a 4, deliberately pressed area that creates emphasis, right? It actually draws you in. That would be a 4 for impressing. And then the last thing, just an original and daring surface decoration. It doesn't mean you can get some inspiration from another subject, but again, always looking for originality.